Core Use Bloody History. You're back again. It's good. Today we're going to talk about some executive action. If you're listening to me at this point, you should understand what executive action means. Executive action referred to our CIA's policy of assassination. So, this document was released. It's in the National Archives, released October 2017. Section 1, titled The Executive Action Capability. Along with the question of authorization for actual assassination attempts, the committee considered the extent and nature of authorization for a CIA project, which included as one element the development of an assassination capability. Introduction. Sometime in early 1961, Richard Bissell, Deputy Director of Plans, instructed William Harvey, who was at the time the chief of one of the CIA's foreign intelligence staffs, to establish an executive action capability, which included research into capability to assassinate foreign leaders. Bissell, 6975, page 51, and Harvey, 62575, page 36 to 37. At some time within the same period, Bissell and McGeorge Bundy, Special Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, had a conversation about the matter. Bissell, Harvey, and Helms all agreed that the generalized capability was never used. Executive action is a CIA euphemism, defined by the testimony before the committee as a project for the research into developing means for overthrowing political leaders, including the capability to perform assassinations. Bissell indicated that the executive action covered a wide spectrum of actions to eliminate the effectiveness of foreign leaders, with assassination as the most extreme action on the spectrum. The Inspector General's report described executive action as a general standby capability to carry out assassination when required. The project was given the codename Zrrifle by the CIA. A single asset given the cryptoname QJ Win was placed under Harvey's supervision for the Zrrifle project, but never used in connection with any actual assassination efforts. Richard Helms describes QJ Win's capability. Quote, "If you needed somebody to carry out murder, I guess you had a man who might be prepared to carry it out." That's from Richard Helms' deposition on 6/13/75. We should try to find that. Richard Helms' deposition, June 13th, 75. Harvey did use Agent QJ Win, however, to spot individuals with criminal and underworld connections in Europe for possible multipurpose use. For example, QJ Win reported that a potential asset in the Middle East was the leader of a gambling syndicate and with an available pool of assassins. However, Harvey testified that, quote, "During the entire existence of the entire Zrrifle project, no agent was recruited for the purpose of assassination, and no even tentative targeting or target list was ever drawn." Project Zrrifle involved generally assessing the problems and requirements of assassination and developing a standby assassination capability. More specifically, involved spotting potential agents and researching assassination techniques that might be used. Bissell characterized Project Zrrifle as an internal and purely preparatory. The IG report of 1967 found no indication in the file that the executive action capability of Zrrifle QJ Win was ever used, but said that after Harvey took over the Castro operation, he ran it as one aspect of Zrrifle. Okay, so we have a little asterisk here. Let me read this. It says Zrrifle was a cryptonym relating to two programs. One was the executive action assassination capability. The other was another program which is not part of the subject matter of this report. William Harvey had been in charge of the CIA section with general responsibility for such programs. This second program was genuine, but it also provided a cover for any executive action operation. All right, so right off the bat, I can tell you two things. First off, I tentatively identified QJ Win a long, long time ago. The simple references to Madrid were very obvious that QJ Win was Otto Skorzeny, who was Hitler's bodyguard. And the more I read about QJ Win, the more I began to suspect that there were two QJ Wins, because they also kept referencing QJ Win's connections in Marseille and in Nice, right? Part of the Corsicans. So I'm like, wait a minute. Otto Skorzeny ain't no Corsican. Can't pass for no Corsican. He's not in with the Corsicans. He's in Madrid doing his own thing up there. So I started to suspect that there were two QJ Wins. The other being Jean-Pierre Lafitte, international man of mystery. And I was right. Turns out I was right. So Hank Albarelli was able to confirm that there were two QJ Wins. He doesn't outright name them in his book. I don't remember if he does. I don't think he does at all. I think he implies that Lafitte might have been QJ Win. But also, he has to have known Skorzeny. He had to have come to the conclusion that the QJ Wins were Skorzeny and Lafitte. He had to have. There's no other... I mean, that's the fucking fact of the matter, so therefore he had to have come to that conclusion. Either that, because I don't... See, here's the thing. I give him a little more credit than these other JFK wannabe researcher jerk-offs who fucking just dance... You know, they'll circle the drain forever. Like an infinite loop of circling the drain without pulling the fucking trigger, and they'll never come to any singular conclusion. It's unbelievable, really. All right, continuing on. Let me reread this sentence. The IG report of 67 found no indication in the file that the executive action capability of Zrrifle QJ Win was ever used, but said that after Harvey took over the Castro operation, he ran it as one aspect of Zrrifle. I don't buy anything about the Castro operation, period. Show me some fucking evidence, okay? Tell me more than exploding cigars and fucking Maria, what's-her-face, the chick who ran with Sturgis, who was allegedly fucking Castro and going to kill. I don't believe a goddamn word out of her mouth. So, I don't believe any of the fucking assassination attempts on Castro. You telling me we took out fucking Iraq in like 6 hours and we couldn't knock off Castro in 60 years? Like, go fuck yourself if you have that much of a fucking breakdown in your cognitive fucking processes that you don't think we could have knocked off Castro in a day if we really wanted to. And I don't know what the fuck to tell you, man. Go look in a mirror. All right. The question of White House initiation, authorization, or knowledge of the executive action project. There is general agreement on one fact. At some point in early 1961, Bissell discussed the executive action capability with Bundy. The timing of that conversation and whether the White House urged that a capability be created were matters on which the evidence varied widely. Harvey testified that Bissell had told him that the White House had twice urged the creation of such a capability, and the Inspector General's report quoted notes of Harvey's, no longer in existence, to that effect. Bissell did not recall any specific conversations with the White House. However, his initial testimony assumed that correctness of Harvey's notes and stated that while he could have created the capability on his own, any urgings would have come from Bundy or Walt Rostow. In a later appearance, however, Bissell said that he merely informed Bundy of the capability and that the context was a briefing by him and not urging by Bundy. Bundy said he received a briefing and gave no urging. Though he raised no objections, Rostow said he never heard of the project. William Harvey testified that he was almost certain that on January 25th and 26th, 1961, he met with CIA officials Sidney Gottlieb, the new chief of CIA's Technical Services Division, and Arnold Silver, the CIA recruiting officer, to discuss the feasibility of creating a capability within the agency for executive action. After reviewing his notes of these meetings, Harvey testified that they took place after his initial discussions of executive action with Bissell, which he said might have transpired in early January. When Bissell was shown these notes, he agreed with Harvey about the timing of their initial discussions. All right, we got a whole bunch of asterisks here. It says asterisk, discussion of whether Zrrifle was related to the actual assassination efforts against Castro is found at section 6. I'm sorry, at section D, infra. I don't know what that means. On the next page, the next asterisk says, as to the date of these notes, Harvey was asked whether his notations 25/1 SIDG and 26/1-AS indicate that he spoke to Sidney Gottlieb and Arnold Silver in 1961 as opposed to 62. Harvey testified as follows. And it's your judgment that it is January 26, 61 and is about the subject of executive action. Yes, it is. And it followed your conversation with Mr. Bissell that you have recounted. Well, when I first looked at this, I thought this has got to be 62, but I'm almost certain now that it is not. If this is true, this might place the first discussion that I had with Dick Bissell in early January, and this is difficult to pinpoint because there were several such discussions in varying degrees of detail during the period in the spring and very early in 61 to the fall of 61 period, but I did find out fairly early on that Silver discussions of executive action with Bissell, which he said might have transpired in early January. When Bissell was shown these notes, he agreed with Harvey about the timing of their initial discussion. So, yeah, so that is definitely 61 then. So the initial executive action discussions took place in 61 in January. That is before the Bay of Pigs, right? See, I'm convinced that after the Bay of Pigs, the CIA was like, fuck. And Kennedy's like, we're not going to do any more actions, right? So the CIA was like, damn it, we got to make friends with this guy. We got to do something. We have to, because their continued connections to Cuba maintained. So I don't buy for a second they were trying to kill motherfucking Castro. Nope. They might have had a program where they were cosplaying, they were LARPing that they were going to kill Castro, going through the motions, but never had any intention. Another left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing kind of thing. All right. I'm sorry, the way they have this note set up here, it's kind of difficult to tell where one stops and one starts. So it looks like this is still part of this asterisk where we talk about the dates of 61 and 62, but it continues down here. Harvey had also testified that after receiving Bissell's initial instructions to establish an executive action capability, the first thing I did was discuss in theoretical terms with a few officers whom I trusted quite implicitly the whole subject of assassination or possible assets, our posture going back, if you will, even to the fundamental question of A, is assassination a proper weapon of American intelligence services? And B, even if you assume that it is it within our capability, within the framework of this government, to do it effectively and properly, securely, and discreetly? Those seem like pretty rational questions, huh? The Inspector General's report connected Silver and Gottlieb to the early stages of the executive action project as follows. It's amazing Gottlieb's involved in this thing. Gottlieb in charge of MK Ultra, along with George White. But Gottlieb seems to have his hands in all kinds of stuff. He seems to have been much higher up the food chain than we might possibly otherwise believe. The Inspector General's report connected Silver and Gottlieb to the early stages of the executive action project as follows. Harvey says that Bissell had already discussed certain aspects of the problem with Arnold Silver and with Sidney Gottlieb. Since Silver was already cut in, Harvey used him in developing the executive action capability. Harvey's mention of him, Gottlieb, in this connection may explain a notation by Dr. Gunn that Harvey instructed Gunn to discuss techniques with Gottlieb without associating the discussion with the Castro operation. And that's from the Inspector General's report, page 37, page 38. It is evident from the testimony of Harvey and Bissell that the turnover to Harvey of the Roselli contact in November 61 was discussed as part of Zrrifle. See Section D, Infra. Thus, their initial discussion of executive action can at least be dated before November 1961, and the 25/1 and 26/1 notations would have referred to January 1961. All right. Now we're done with the asterisk. We're back to the report. Harvey testified that the executive action capability was intended to include assassinations. His cryptic handwritten notes of the January 25-26 meetings preserved at the CIA contain phrases which suggest a discussion of assassination, and Harvey confirmed this interpretation. Last resort beyond last resort, and a confession of weakness, the magic button, and never mentioned word assassination. The Inspector General's report did not mention these notes or their dates. However, in describing Richard Bissell's initial assignment of the Executive Action Project to Harvey, it's referred to another set of Harvey's notes, which were destroyed after the preparation of the report. The excerpt from these notes quoted Bissell as saying to Harvey, "The White House had twice urged me to create such a capability." Harvey also testified that this urging was mentioned in his initial discussion of executive action with Bissell. However, the testimony from Bissell and White House aides in the Kennedy and Eisenhower administrations is in conflict with Harvey's testimony as to whether such urging had in fact been given to Bissell. We have an asterisk. Harvey's notes also contained a phrase which suggests his concern that any U.S. assassination attempts might breed retaliation from other governments, danger of RIS, Russian intelligence service, counteraction, and monitor if they are blamed. Okay, the following testimony regarding the relationship between the White House and the executive action capability was obtained by committee. Harvey. We're talking about William Harvey. Harvey testified that his missing notes indicated that Bissell mentioned White House urgings to develop an executive action capability. Harvey said that he particularly remembered that Bissell said that he received more than one urging from the White House. Harvey, 625-75. However, he had no direct evidence that Bissell actually had any discussions with the White House. No specific individual in the White House was named to Harvey. Moreover, he said that it would have been improper for him to have asked Bissell who he had talked to, and grossly improper for Bissell to have volunteered that name. Okay, so here's the problem, though. If this is January 61, you're talking about John F. Kennedy. You really think John F. Kennedy wanted an assassination program? No. No. Give me a break. All right, now Bissell. Bissell specifically recalled assigning Harvey to investigate the capability. However, Bissell did not recall a specific conversation with anybody in the White House as origin of his instruction to Harvey. During the course of several appearances before the committee, Bissell's testimony varied as to whether or not he had been urged by the White House to develop an executive action capability. In his initial appearances before the committee on June 9th and 11th, 1975, Bissell made statements that tended to indicate that White House authorization had been given. In response to the twice-urged quotation of Harvey's notes in the Inspector General's report, Bissell said, "I have no reason to believe that Harvey's quote is wrong." Bissell accordingly said in his initial testimony that as far as he knew, it was true that he was asked by the White House to create a general standby assassination capability. Based again upon Harvey's missing notes, White House urging, and his initial statement that he had no reason to challenge their accuracy, Bissell initially gave the opinion that McGeorge Bundy, Special Assistant to President Kennedy for National Security Affairs, and Walt Rostow, Deputy Assistant to President Kennedy during 1961, were the two people from whom such a request was most likely to have come, because they were two of the members of the White House staff who were closest to CIA operations. Okay, all right. This is so important, I'm going to have to screenshot this bitch. Okay. McGeorge Bundy. This fucking cunt is balls deep in all kinds of shady shit. Aside from there being rumors that him and Jack Valenti were hooking up from an FBI informant. These two, Walt Rostow and McGeorge Bundy, would have done that behind Kennedy's back. That is a major revelation. And I don't see how this is anything but true. You got to think of these internal conversations. You got to think William Harvey is close to the end of his career, or he's already out, and doesn't want to go to prison for coming up with an assassination plan. So he's going to tell the truth. And he tells that his boss at the time, Bissell, has him come up with this assassination plan. So he's going to give a real name because he doesn't want to have to be left, holding the bag. And then they talked to Bissell, and Bissell had told Harvey it came from the White House. So he doesn't want to get caught holding the bag either. It probably was from the White House, and knowing the duplicity of McGeorge Bundy. And I haven't looked too deeply into Walt Rostow yet, but he's coming. Knowing the duplicity of McGeorge Bundy, I have no doubts that all of this is fucking 100% true and done behind Kennedy's back. And that right there is a fucking problem. That is a problem. The next logical step is for me to determine whether or not Kennedy was possibly aware of any assassination programs, because we know he was not down at Northwoods, right? I'm assuming this is in the same vein as Northwoods. So Zrrifle and Northwoods have to be intimately connected. Knowing that it comes from McGeorge Bundy and Walt Rostow, that puts a lot in perspective for me. The picture of the backdrop of the Kennedy assassination is becoming fuller. At another point in his initial testimony, Bissell said that the creation of the capability may have been initiated within the agency. And still later he said, there is little doubt in my mind that the Project Rifle was discussed with Rostow and possibly Bundy. When Bissell returned to the committee on July 17th and 22nd, his testimony, given in light of information gained since his earlier appearances, was that there was no White House urging for the creation of the Executive Action Project, although tacit approval for the research project was probably given by Bundy after it was established. First, he was shown the Harvey notes, which had been preserved and which, without any mention of the White House, indicated Harvey had received his assignment prior to January 25-26 of 1961. Those dates, just 5 days after the change of administration, made Bissell conclude that it was very unlikely that that assignment to Harvey was taken as a result of the White House urging or consultation. Bissell said that Bundy did not have any influence on the performance of his agency duties before the presidential inauguration. Bissell added that he did not remember meeting with anyone in the new administration on matters prior to the inauguration. Second, when he returned in July, Bissell also said he was convinced by telephone conversations with Rostow and Bundy that based upon Rostow's duties, which in 1961 had nothing to do with covert action, he, quote, never discussed executive action with Rostow. As for Bundy, Bissell's final testimony after telephone contact with Bundy was that he believed that he had informed Bundy about the capability after it had been created. But Bissell confirmed his original testimony that he did not brief Bundy on the actual assassination plots against Castro already undertaken by the CIA. Bissell was quite certain that he would not have expected Bundy to mention the executive action capability to the president. Bissell testified when asked, would you think of development of a capability to kill foreign leaders was a matter of sufficient importance to bring it to the attention of the president? And Bissell says, in that context and at that time, and given the limited scope of activities within that project, I would not. Bissell said that he and Bundy spoke about an untargeted capability rather than the plan or approval for an assassination operation. Bissell said that although he does not have a specific recollection, he might have mentioned Castro, Lumumba, Trujillo in the course of discussion of executive action because these were the sorts of individuals at that moment in history against whom such a capability might possibly have been employed. Okay, so this now automatically connects us to Permindex and the Israelis, right? Because Lumumba and Trujillo and all these guys were, Permindex was behind the attempted assassinations of these guys, right? Which was definitely involved with CIA and Allen Dulles and Angleton and those guys and the mobsters. He said he might have mentioned Castro, Lumumba, Trujillo in the course of a discussion of executive action because these were the sorts of individuals at that moment in history against whom such a capability might possibly have been employed. Bissell said his impression was that Bundy, in addition to expressing no unfavorable reaction to the project, might have actually given a more affirmative reaction. Bissell testified that he might have interpreted Bundy's reaction as approval for the executive action concept. And then we have a quote from his testimony. I think the testimony of this witness is going further in saying what you received from Bundy was in your review tantamount to approval. Bissell then says, I at least interpret it as, you can call it approval, or you could say no objection. He, Bundy, was briefed on something that was being done, as I now believe, on the initiative of the agency. Bundy's comments is that he made no objection of it. I suspect that his reaction was somewhat more favorable than that, but this is a matter that probably someone listening to the conversation on which such a person should have had differing interpretations. So, okay, let's cut through the bullshit and get down to what's really going on here. Both of them are maintaining a conversation that they could try to attempt to have plausible deniability. Hey, I heard a little birdie told me that, somebody might think an assassination program might be a good idea, but I don't know. And then he goes, oh, really? You heard that? A little birdie told you. Well, a little birdie told me that, maybe that's a good idea. And that maybe oh, okay. So I just, I think I'll just kind of go with this idea, we'll explore it, right? Well, it's exploratory. We're just discussing it and seeing how it would work. Oh, yeah. Sure, let's do this, right? So we can now, I guess, sense the complete and total beginning of this Zrrifle program before it had a name started because of a casual conversation between Bissell and fucking McGeorge Bundy. Of course, McGeorge Bundy, who's directly connected to Jack Valenti, who couldn't have not known Valenti was the shooter on the knoll. So, God, this could be another whole... This is, to me, this is like solidifying another line of connection directly from Valenti to Bundy to Bissell to Harvey to Zrrifle. And obviously... I'm convinced that Jack Valenti was the Max that met with Pierre down in No Name Key, meaning Jean-Pierre Lafitte. So I'm convinced already that Valenti's connected directly to Jean-Pierre Lafitte, who is QJ Win. And so that it seems like the McGeorge Bundy might have been the fucking go-to to connect Jack Valenti and all this. I mean, you got McGeorge Bundy, who's having this conversation with Bissell, so he knows there's an assassination program. FBI informants later say Bundy and Valenti were kicking it, right? We know that they were definitely associates and friends. And you're going to tell me that they were this close to each other and didn't know that association bullshit. That's never the case. So it's looking like McGeorge Bundy might have been a direct connection between the Zrrifle program and Valenti. Bissell's testimony on any conversation with Bundy regarding executive action was speculative reconstruction from first appearance to last, because he had no clear recollection of the events. But Bissell maintained that more formal and specific and explicit approval would have been required before any actual overt steps in the use of the capability. Bissell said that Harvey's notation about White House urgings to develop an executive action capability might have been a slightly confused account of conversation subsequent to the initiation of the project in which Bissell relayed Bundy's reaction to Harvey. Bissell testified that the development of an executive action capability was undoubtedly initiated within the agency. He had acknowledged on his first day of testimony that this would not have been unusual. Quote, "It was the normal practice of the agency and an important part of its mission to create various kinds of capability long before there was any reason to be certain whether those would be used or where or how or for what purpose. The whole ongoing job of a secret intelligence service of recruiting agents is of that character. So it would not be particularly surprising to me if the decision to create this capability had been taken without an outside request." Bundy McGeorge Bundy also testified that he had a conversation with Bissell during which the executive action capability was discussed. Bundy's testimony comports with Bissell's on the fact that they spoke about an untargeted capability rather than an assassination operation. But Bundy said that the capability included killing the individual. Bundy's impression was that the CIA was testing my reaction, not seeking authority. Bundy summarized his testimony by saying, "I'm sure I gave no instruction, but it is only fair to add that I do not recall that I offered any impediment either." Bundy said that he did not take steps to halt the development of the executive action capability or pursue the matter at all, because he was satisfied, quote, that this was not an operational activity and would not become such without two conditions. First, that there would be a desire or request or guidance that there should be planning against some specific individual. And second, that there should be a decision to move against the individual. We have an asterisk here. For example, Bissell testified that on his own initiative, he had requested a CIA officer go to the Congo to make plans and develop the capability for an assassination attempt against Lumumba, if ordered. And we have a double asterisk here. It says Bundy also testified that he had a vague recollection of hearing about poison in relation to Cuba, but he did not connect this to the conversation about executive action. See footnote page 6, Kennedy pre-Bay of Pigs, section supra. Bundy testified that he believed that neither of these conditions had been fulfilled. Bundy recalled the conversation as taking place, quote, sometime in the early months of '61. When questioned about the dates in Harvey's notes, Bundy rated the chance that the conversation about executive action took place before January 25th, when Harvey was already discussing the project at CIA pursuant to Bissell's directive, as near zero because the new administration had been in office less than a week, and he had been preoccupied with other problems, including the Berlin crisis and reorganizing the national security staff. Bundy testified that he did not brief the president on the executive action project. Quote, Chairman, and you have testified that you did not take the matter to the president. Bundy, as far as I can recall, Mr. Chairman. Bundy explained that the Division of Responsibility for National Security Affairs excluded Rostow from jurisdiction over covert operations, making it unlikely that Rostow would be briefed on a project like Zrrifle. Rostow testified that he was morally certain that during his entire tenure in government he never heard a reference to executive action or such capability or such an intention to act by the U.S. Goodpaster and Gray, the responsibility for national security affairs during the latter part of the Eisenhower administration was borne by Andrew Goodpaster and Gordon Gray. However, there was no evidence which raised the name of either man in connection with the development of an executive action capability. Both Goodpaster and Gray testified to having no knowledge of it. All right, C, authorization or knowledge of executive action projects by DCI. Richard Bissell said he was quite certain that Allen Dulles had full knowledge of the executive action project for two reasons. First, it would have come to the DCI's attention at the time of the transfer of William Harvey between components of the agency to work on Cuban operations. And second, Bissell would imagine it was mentioned to Dulles at the initiation of the project. Bissell and Harvey briefed Richard Helms on Project Zrrifle when he became DDP. But Bissell did not recall briefing John McCone about the project when McCone took over as DCI. McCone testified that he had no knowledge of such a project. William Harvey said it was assumed that the project was within the parameters permitted by the DCI, but Harvey testified that officially advising the DCI the existence of the project was a bridge we did not cross and would not have crossed until, quote, there was either specific targeting or specific operation or specific recruitment. D, the question of whether Project Zrrifle was connected to any actual assassination plots. The committee has sought to determine whether the CIA development of executive action capability was related in any way to the actual assassination efforts. One question raised by this inquiry is whether the participants in the assassination operations might have perceived the executive action capability as in some way lending legitimacy to the actual assassination efforts. Conversation between Bissell and Bundy. In his early testimony, Bissell said he did not have a recollection of whether he discussed the names of Castro, Lumumba, and Trujillo with anyone in the White House in the course of discussing the project to develop an executive action capability. However, Bissell testified that it was perfectly plausible that I would have used examples. He continued, quote, "In such a discussion of a capability, I might well have used the three names that I just gave because these were the sorts of individuals at that moment in history against whom such a capability might possibly have been employed." Bissell and Bundy both testified, however, that their discussion of the development of the capability for assassination did not involve any mention of actual assassination plans or attempts. There is no testimony to the contrary. The account of this conversation raises a question as to whether Bissell acted properly in withholding from Bundy the fact that assassination efforts against Castro had already been mounted and were moving forward. Bundy was responsible to a new president for national security affairs, and Bissell was his principal source of information about covert operations at the CIA. Bissell's instructions to take over responsibility for underworld contact, November 1961. Both Bissell and Harvey recall a meeting in November 1961 in which Harvey was instructed to take over the contact with John Roselli, which had been used for the initial poison pill plot as part of Project Zrrifle. Harvey's notes placed the meeting on November 15, 1961, during the period in which Harvey was freed from his duties on another agency staff to take over direction of Task Force W, the locus of CIA activity against the Castro regime. According to Bissell and Harvey, the November meeting involved only the planning and research of a capability rather than a targeted operation against Castro. But Bissell acknowledged that the purpose of the Roselli contact had been to assassinate Castro, and that it is a fair inference that there would have been no reason to maintain the contact, unless there was some possibility of reactivating that operation. Bissell stated that because the assassination plot against Castro involving the syndicate, quote, had been stood down after the Bay of Pigs and there was no authorization to pursue it actively, the responsibility that was given to him, Harvey, was that of taking over an inactive contact. Bissell said that he had, in effect, asked Harvey to stand watch over the contact in case any action should be required, and further testified that it was never required. The Inspector General's report stated, quote, "After Harvey took over the Castro operation, he ran it as one aspect of Zrrifle." That's on the IG's report, page 40. Harvey recalled that during a discussion with Bissell of the creation of an executive action capability, Bissell advised him of a then-going operation involving the names of Mayu and possibly Roselli and Giancana, which was part of the agency's effort to develop a capability for executive action. Harvey said that at the time of this discussion, the operation had been in train for approximately 2 years or perhaps 18 months. Although his net impression was that both the exploratory project and the specific operation were fully authorized and approved, Harvey said he could not testify that specific White House authority for this given operation was implied or stated. Bissell does not recall telling anyone in the White House that something had to be done to bring a CIA officer together with the criminal syndicate. Harvey did not recall any mention of the White House or any higher authority than the DDP in his November meeting with Bissell. Although Richard Helms was briefed and given administrative responsibility as DDP for Project Zrrifle, 3 months later he did not recall that Zrrifle was ever contemplated as a capability to assassinate Castro. Asked whether the actual assassination efforts against Castro were related to Zrrifle, Helms testified, quote, "In my mind, those lines never crossed." However, Bissell's testimony leaves more ambiguity. Quote, "The contact with the syndicate, which had Castro as its targets, folded into the Zrrifle project, and they became one. When asked by Senator Baker whether the executive action capability for assassination was used against Castro, Bissell replied that it was in the later phase. The instruction from Bissell to Harvey on November 15, 1961, however, preceded the reactivation of the CIA syndicate assassination operation against Castro by approximately 5 months. Use of Agent QJ Wynn in Africa. QJ Wynn was a foreign citizen with a criminal background who had been recruited by the CIA for certain sensitive programs involving surreptitious entries, which predated Project Zrrifle. Harvey testified that QJ Wynn's function after the advent of Project Zrrifle in 1961 was restricted to the spotting of potential assets for multi-purpose covert use. However, in the fall of 1960, before Harvey was assigned to create Project Zrrifle by Richard Bissell, Agent Q.J. Wynn had been dispatched to the Congo by Arnold Silver, his supervising CIA case officer in Europe. William Harvey, as the chief of the CIA Foreign Intelligence Staff on which Silver worked, had ordered Q.J. Wynn's mission to the Congo. William Harvey, as the chief of the CIA Foreign Intelligence Staff on which Silver worked, had ordered Q.J. Wynn's mission to the Congo, CIA Dispatch AUDW-147, 11-2 of 60, and arranged the financial accounting for the mission afterward. Memorandum to Finance Division from William K. Harvey, 11161. Q.J. Wynn's activities in the Congo are treated in detail in the discussion of the Lumumba case. There are two factors which may raise a question as to whether Q.J. Wynn was being used in an ad hoc capacity to develop an assassination capability before Zrrifle was formally initiated. First, there is a similarity in the case characters. Harvey, Q.J. Wynn, Silver, and Gottlieb were connected with the Lumumba matter and reappear in connection with the subsequent development of Zrrifle. Second, Bissell informed Harvey that the development of an assassination capability had already been discussed with Silver and Gottlieb before Harvey's assignment to Zrrifle. That another one strikes me as a massively important paragraph, and I'm screenshotting it. Nevertheless, there does not appear to be any firm evidence of a connection between Q.J. Wynn and the plot to assassinate Lumumba. Oh, really? So funny. All right. Looks like we have another document on Trujillo. It was Dominican Republic, I believe. Summary. Rafael Trujillo was assassinated by a group of Dominican dissidents on May 30th, 1961. Trujillo was a brutal dictator, and both Eisenhower and Kennedy administrations encouraged the overthrow of his regime by Dominican dissidents. Toward that end, the highest policy levels of both administrations approved or condoned supplying arms to the dissidents, although there is no evidence that the United States instigated any assassination activity. Certain evidence tends to link the United States officials to the assassination plans. Material support consisting of 3 pistols, 3 carbines was supplied to various dissidents, while United States officials knew that the dissidents intended to overthrow Trujillo, probably by assassination. There is no direct evidence that the weapons which were passed were used in the assassination. The evidence is inconclusive as to how high in the two administrations' information the dissidents' assassination plots had been passed prior to the spring of 1961. It's so fucking hilarious. Beginning of March of 61, the dissidents began asking United States officials for machine guns. By the time 4 M3 machine guns were shipped to the CIA station in the chief Dominican capital in April, it was well known that the dissidents wanted them for use in connection with the assassination. Thereafter, however, permission to deliver the machine guns to the dissidents was denied, and the guns were never passed. 2 days before the assassination, President Kennedy personally authorized a cable to the U.S. Consul General in the Dominican Republic stating that the United States government, as a matter of general principle, could not condone political assassinations, but at the same time indicating the United States continued to support the dissidents and stood ready to recognize them in the event that they were successful in their endeavor to overthrow Trujillo. Background. Rafael Trujillo came to power in the Dominican Republic in 1930. For most of his tenure, the United States government supported him, and he was regarded throughout much of the Caribbean and Latin America as a protege of the United States. Trujillo's rule, always harsh and dictatorial, became more arbitrary during the 1950s. As a result, the United States' image was increasingly tarnished in the eyes of many Latin Americans. Increasing American awareness of Trujillo's brutality and fear that it would lead to Castro-type revolution caused U.S. officials to consider various plans to hasten his abdication or downfall. As early as February of 1960, the Eisenhower administration gave a high-level consideration to a program of covert aid to Dominican dissidents. In April 1960, President Eisenhower approved a contingency plan for the Dominican Republic, which provided, in part, that if the situation deteriorated still further, quote, the United States would immediately take political action to remove Trujillo from the Dominican Republic as soon as a suitable successor regime can be induced to take over, with the assurance of U.S. political, economic, and, if necessary, military support. Memo from the President Secretary of State Herter to the president in 41460. Simultaneously, the United States was trying to organize hemispheric opposition to the Castro regime in Cuba. Latin American leaders such as President Betancourt of Venezuela pressed the United States to take affirmative action against Trujillo to dispel criticism that the U.S. opposed dictatorships of the left only. A belief that Castro's road to power was paved by the excesses of Batista led to concern that the Dominican Republic might also eventually fall victim to a Castro-style communist regime. 2. Initial contact with dissidents and request for arms. During the spring of 1960, the U.S. ambassador to the Dominican Republic, Joseph Farland, made initial contact with dissidents who sought to free their country from Trujillo's grasp. They asked for sniper rifles, although documentary evidence indicates that a recommendation to provide these rifles was approved both within the State Department and the CIA. The rifles were never provided. Dissident contacts. Ambassador Farland established contact with a group of dissidents regarded as moderate, pro-U.S., and desirous of establishing a democratic form of government. Farland affidavit. Prior to his final departure from the Dominican Republic in May of 1960, the ambassador introduced his deputy chief of mission, Henry Dearborn, to the dissident leaders, indicating that Dearborn could be trusted. Then on June 16, 1960, CIA headquarters cabled a request that Dearborn become the communist link between the dissidents and the CIA. The cable stated that Dearborn's role had the unofficial approval of Assistant Secretary of State for Inter-American Affairs, Roy R. Rubottom, emphasis in the original. Dearborn agreed. He requested, however, that CIA confirm the arrangement with the dissidents as being that the U.S. would clandestinely assist the opposition to develop effective force to accomplish Trujillo overthrow, but would not undertake any overt action itself against Trujillo government while in its full control of the Dominican Republic. CIA headquarters confirmed Dearborn's understanding of the arrangement. The sniper rifles. During the concourse of cocktail party in the Dominican Republic, a leading dissident made a specific request to Ambassador Farland for a limited number of rifles with telescopic sights. The ambassador promised to pass on the request. Farland affidavit. He apparently did so after returning to Washington in May of 1960. Documents indicate that consideration was given within the CIA to airdropping rifles to the Dominican Republic at a June 21, 1960 meeting with redacted of the CIA Western Hemisphere Division. Ambassador Farland reportedly suggested possible sites for the drops. CIA Memo 62160. Documents also indicate that a meeting was held around the end of June 1960 between Assistant Secretary for State for Inter-American Affairs, Roy R. Rubottom, and Colonel J.C. King, chief of the CIA's Western Hemisphere Division. Apparently, King sought to learn the Assistant Secretary's view regarding to what extent will the U.S. government participate in the overthrow of Trujillo. A number of questions were raised by King, among them, quote, would it provide a small number of sniper rifles or other devices for the removal of key Trujillo people from the scene? King's handwriting notes indicate that Rubottom's response to that question was yes. It's from a CIA memo of 62860, the King affidavit. On July 1st, 60, a memorandum directed to General Cabell, the acting director of Central Intelligence, was prepared for Colonel King's signature and, in his absence, signed by his principal deputy, Rudy Gomez. The memorandum stated that a principal leader of the anti-Trujillo opposition and asked Ambassador Farland for a limited number of arms to precipitate Trujillo's overthrow and recognized that such arms, quote, presumably would be used against key members of the Trujillo regime, end quote. The memorandum recommended that the arms be provided since the fall of the Trujillo regime appeared inevitable, and therefore U.S. relations with opposition should be as close as possible. Providing the arms as requested would contribute significantly towards this end. Specifically, the recommendation was to deliver to dissidents in the Dominican Republic 12 sterile rifles with telescopic sights together with 500 rounds of ammunition. Paragraph 4 of the memorandum stated, quote, approval for delivery of these arms has been given by Assistant Secretary of State Roy Rubottom, who requests that the arms be placed in the hands of the opposition at the earliest possible moment. Gomez's recommendation was concurred in by Richard Helms as acting DDP and approved by General Cabell. The kind of arms approved sterile rifles with telescopic sights together with the statement that they would be presumably used against key members of Trujillo regime clearly indicated the targeted use for which the weapons were intended. On July 1st, 1960, a cable was sent to Dearborn by CIA headquarters informing him of the plan to airdrop 12 telescopically sighted rifles into the Dominican Republic. The cable inquired whether the dissidents had the capability to realign the sights if thrown off by the airdrop. On July 14th, 1960, Dearborn replied that the dissident leaders were against any further action in the Dominican Republic until after resolution by the OAS of a Venezuelan complaint then pending against Trujillo. The dissidents reportedly believed that sufficiently strong action by the OAS could bring Trujillo's downfall without further effort on their part. The 12 sniper rifles were never furnished to the dissidents. On August 26, 1960, Dearborn cabled Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Lester Mallory reporting on a meeting between the dissident leader and John Barfield, the consulate's political officer. The dissident leader was reported to have lost enthusiasm for an assassination attempt and was then speaking from an invasion from Venezuela. However, by September 1st, 1960, dissidents were again speaking about the possible provision to arm them. This time, the request was for 200 rifles. For the next several months, consideration centered on providing 200 to 300 guns. Summer and fall of 1960. In August 1960, the United States severed diplomatic relations with the Dominican Republic and recalled most of its personnel. Dearborn was left as consul general and de facto CIA chief of station. Consideration was given both to providing arms and explosive devices and to the use of high-level emissaries to persuade Trujillo to abdicate. By the end of the year, a broad plan of general support to anti-Trujillo forces both within and without the country was approved. All right, that's the end of that section. We're going to call it right there for today. We'll be back on Monday. We're going to continue to talk about Zrrifle. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.